And welcome everyone to Beyond the Forecast, where today we're going to be explaining a few things in the science and weather realm, but also sharing some fun facts, whether it's sustained weather history, and showing off some viewer photos that are absolutely gorgeous. But we're also going to show you something that is going to be very fun for us in tomorrow's episode coming up a little bit later. But first off, meteorologist John Gross, he is going to take us into the explanation of frost quakes. Yeah, you heard me, frost and quakes. They're a thing. Do they impact us a whole lot? No, but he's going to explain why they happen and what they are and if they'll impact you in their first segment today. And then John will be back to detailed look at heat safety and why you need to pay attention to everything heat, because believe it or not, if you recall back a few episodes, we asked you what is the number one weather-related death weather event in America, and it is, believe it or not, heat. Heat is the number one reason for many deaths related to weather. So John is going to break down heat safety and what you need to pay attention to, and then the fun thing that we're going to have tomorrow. We'll preview our fun in the upcoming episode for tomorrow on Mackinac Island. That's right, we are going to be on Mackinac Island for the opening of Mackinac Island for your Friday. So we're going to have a preview of what you can expect for that episode coming up at the end. Now, let's take a look back at this day in weather history. Now, yesterday, we did start off rather chilly across northern Michigan's 20s and 30s, but nowhere near where a place in Montana started off for May 1st. So May 1st, 1954, Polebridge, Montana dipped to 5 degrees below zero to establish a state record for the month of May. May 1st, 5 below zero in Polebridge, Montana. That is absolutely crazy to think May 1st and you see 5 degrees below zero. Whew, that would be a shock to the system, I can tell you that. 25 felt cold enough here in northern Michigan. I don't need to see 5 below. Trivia time. Now, Monday, if you crawl back to Monday, we've had 2 days with soccer, so we have to go all the way back to Monday for your trivia question. We asked you, what is predicting weather called? Yeah, I put this one down. I was like, come on. You have to know this one, right? Is it called guessing? Some may say that. Watching, forecasting, or observing. It's forecasting. But, I mean, it's a little bit of everything, I guess. It's just not guessing, but forecasting, sometimes you have to put in your best educated guess. So forecasting is the answer. But today, we want to know true or false. Switching it up a little bit on you. True or false, large and heavy vehicles, such as SUVs and pickups, are safe to drive through floodwaters. QR code. Hit that with your phone and weigh in. Put your answer down, and it will tell you the correct answer. But is it true or is it false? Big vehicles, such as SUVs and trucks, they don't have to worry. They can drive right through those floodwaters. We'll have the answer coming up tomorrow on Mackinac Island. Now, viewer photo of the day. This is brought to you by Great Rooms, as it is every day. Today's picture was sent in from Sheila Dinger. This photo was snapped at Frankfurt as the cold front moved in right around noon on Tuesday with those storms that we had roll through Monday night into Tuesday morning. Well, she snapped this amazing picture and is absolutely gorgeous. It's a shelf cloud coming off of Lake Michigan, and it was rolling through Frankfurt right around noon. So that cold front moved through and then dropped temperatures by a ton, and our winds were extremely gusty, but that is an absolutely gorgeous view. That is another reason that living on the lakes is so cool, because when you have storms coming from Wisconsin and you can see those shelf clouds rolling through, pretty amazing to see. So thank you, Sheila, for sending that in from Frankfurt. And thank you to Great Rooms for sponsoring viewer photo of the day. Now, let's send it over to meteorologist John Gross and frost quakes. What are they, and can we experience them? They're actually pretty cool, but some of you may not have heard of them. So we're going to break that all down for you coming up right after the break.
Hey there, everybody. Meteorologist John Gross. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that doesn't happen very often, but it does happen when you have the right conditions. And usually, we are talking about a much colder time of the year. And when you're talking about what's called a frostquake, otherwise known as a cryoseism, we'll go ahead and stick with the frostquake. But this is essentially when you're talking about ice formation underground instead of on the surface. So you can kind of think of this as the same type of way a pothole would be created on the road surface. the freezing and the thawing process. But instead, we're talking about more of that water freezing underground, areas in the soil, even as far down as the bedrock. And remember, when we have liquid water changing to a solid, in this case ice, that water starts to expand. And once we can see that expansion happening very, very quickly, this is when we start to hear, or at least feel, what the effects are from what we call a frost quake. So essentially, this can be thought of as a mini earthquake triggered by weather, but not tectonic plates. That's when you're getting more into the earthquake side of things. But this again is just a rapid expansion of water turning to ice, usually in the soil, if not even the bedrock. And when it happens very, very quickly, it doesn't happen for long, but you can definitely hear it, and you can even feel it, depending on exactly where you're located from where the frost quake occurs. So here's a look at some of the steps, and usually what you're talking about when you do talk about a frost quake occurring. Again, you need to have rapidly falling temperatures, so we need to get our numbers not only at the surface, but as you're going farther down in the soil, even towards the bedrock, well below freezing. So you need to get that water cold enough to where you can see it start to freeze very, very quickly from a solid, or at least from a liquid to a solid. So then, once we get that water starts to freeze very, very quickly. And like we mentioned before, when you're talking about ice formation, when you see that happening, that water is starting to expand. So again, you can kind of think of this as how a pothole would form on the road surface. When you start to get that water pooling under the road, and then it gets really, really cold, that water starts to freeze, it starts to expand, and then it starts to make the road surface weaker. And as cars travel over it, that's how you can get that pothole to form. Same type of philosophy here, but instead we're going underground into the soil and even into the bedrock. So as that new ice starts to expand, it starts to put more and more pressure on the surrounding soil and even on the surrounding bedrock. Now, you have to think, you're already underground, so everything above you, as far as any other layers of soil, is already pressing down on that ice. So as that ice continues to form, the pressure continues to build, and once it builds enough, then that soil and the rock, or at least surrounding, that starts to crack. And once we start to get that cracking, that can result in, well, loud booms or even a small shake, depending on exactly, again, where you're located from where the frost quake occurs. And that's how we can get what's called a frost quake. I'm meteorologist John Gross reporting for Beyond the Forecast.
Thanks, John. Interesting that frost can do that. Now, coming up next, meteorologist John Gross is going to break down heat safety because the number one weather-related death across North America is heat. We'll have more details on that coming up after the break.
Hey there, everybody. Meteorologist John Gross, and today we're going to be talking about a topic that usually relates more to the summer months, when you're getting into May, June, August, July, even September sometimes, but it also has to do with exactly where you're located. However, as you're going throughout most of Michigan, this is usually something we talk about again getting into the summer months, and that is humidity. Not only do we have to talk about the heat, but you have to talk about the humidity. And a term that goes hand in hand with humidity is called the dew point. And the dew point is actually helping to measure the amount of moisture content that we currently have in the atmosphere. And we have it on a numerical scale. But once you start to get numbers near 60 plus, closer to 70 plus, that's when you're starting to get a lot more moisture in the atmosphere. And that is usually a result of it being a very warm and humid air mass. Versus if you have your dew points 60 or less, you're usually talking about a drier air mass, not as humid. But whether you're talking about a very humid day or a very dry day, that all has to do with how you feel. If you're outside, if you're at the beach, if you're doing yard work, whatever it might be, it can make you feel more uncomfortable if you're talking about more humidity versus lower humidity, which you're usually not feeling as uncomfortable. You could still feel hot, but you're usually not going to be feeling uncomfortable or at least sweaty, because your body is naturally trying to cool itself off. So when you're talking about low humidity, you're talking about that drier air. And when you have that drier air, it allows the moisture from your body, that natural sweat, to evaporate easier. So that means you're probably, at least on this perspective, feeling a little bit more comfortable outside, depending on how long you're spending outdoors, versus a very warm and humid air mass. Because when you're talking about that, you have a lot of moisture content, so your body, when it does start to sweat and naturally try to cool itself off, it can't, because there's a lot of moisture. So therefore, it leaves you feeling more uncomfortable and probably, as a result, a little bit more sweaty too. So here's a term also that we talk about with humidity. It's called the heat index, and you can think of this as the summer equivalent of wind chill. So usually in the winter time, we talk about the feels like temperature. You have to combine the temperature and the wind speed to give you that feels like temperature. It's the same philosophy, but now we're converting it more towards a summer outlook. So now our heat index, you're talking about the temperature and you're talking about the relative humidity. How much moisture do we have in the atmosphere? So here's a few examples. So you have your temperature at 80 degrees, and as we continue to increase the relative humidity, notice our feels like temperature, our heat index, doesn't really increase too much. Even when you're getting towards 70 to 80% relative humidity, it's still feeling like 83 or 84 degrees compared to the actual air temperature of 80. Let's increase the number. So now you're at a temperature of 86 degrees, and as we continue to climb the ladder with our relative humidity, once you're getting towards 70, 75%, notice our temperature, or at least our heat index, that number really does start to go up. You're talking about upper 80s, throughout the 90s, even getting closer to the century mark, so that's at 86 degrees. And if you have a temperature that's even pushing in the low 90s, that's when you're really starting to feel that humidity. Because once we, again, get our relative humidity values pretty much above 60%, that's when your feels like temperatures are starting to get well into the triple digits. And that can be feeling very, very uncomfortable. And not only are you feeling uncomfortable, it's just very dangerous because you want to make sure that you are staying hydrated, especially if you're going to be spending a longer period of time outside. So here's a look at some heat exhaustion safety tips if we are talking about very humid days. And one of the main ones is you never want to leave kids or pets inside a parked vehicle, even if it's just for a few minutes. The temperature inside a vehicle can get very, very hot very, very quickly, especially when you're talking about a lot of relative humidity or at least a lot of moisture content with a very hot day. So again, avoiding that and making sure that you and everyone you love, including your four-legged friends, are staying hydrated with water. Try to avoid strenuous activities if you can, if you're talking about that very hot day, or at least do it in cycles. Find shade or stay in the AC if you can. I know that there are some instances where the air conditioner might not be available, but trying to at least get in a cooler area, a place with shade, that can easily drop the temperature by 5 or even 10 degrees. And one last good tip, especially if you're going to be out in the direct sunlight, remember darker clothes. Take my suit, for example. If it's black, it's going to absorb more of that sunlight and it's going to hold more of that heat in. Compared to my light blue shirt, that's going to bring in less sunlight. So that is actually going to help to keep me just a few degrees cooler. So wearing light-colored clothing and lightweight clothing, that can also help to keep you just a little bit cooler when we are talking about a lot of humidity. I'm meteorologist John Gross reporting for Beyond the Forecast.
Thanks, John. Now, coming up next, we preview the opening of Mackinac Island because I will be there live throughout the day Friday, and we'll have a special Beyond the Forecast episode surrounding the island life. Love those details right after the break.
I want to talk to you about fog. Yeah. We are seeing our very chilly nights. We are seeing our very normal October weather for the most part. Look at, that's a hawk. Gino, Edzo, where you at? Intruder alert. All right, so before I saw the hawk, it just reminds me of Looney Tunes, you know? I'm a chicken hawk.
Yeah, I'm a chicken hawk. I'll show that chicken who's boss.
With the colder temperatures we've seen overnight in the 20s and 30s the last few nights, we are starting to see that all-important fall fog. Now, it can get pretty thick in some spots, especially here in northern Michigan, because of a few different factors. You have the very warm water still, because the waters are not going to cool as the surface does. So over the lakes, obviously, you get some very big tails of fog, and they'll work their way onshore, offshore, and hang around for a really long time, because it's very tough to break up that very saturated air that is just above the lake. Now, inland's very different, because we tend to see fog develop in those dips and valleys, as well as areas where you tend to see moisture, dew in the morning, and very chilly temperatures. That air is rising, a little bit warmer. It starts warming that air just above the ground, becomes very saturated, turns into that fog. And not to mention inland lakes, which are also still very warm, you tend to get that steam fog that will turn into just clouds of fog. So it's pretty crazy to think that fall and spring are usually when we get our fog at the thickest points, but it's all because of where your dew points are, where the moisture levels are, but also where your temperatures are, both at the surface, whether it's for water or for ground, and also what's sinking to the surface from the air. So it is a few different aspects, but let's kind of focus on just basic fog and how it develops. Well, first off, you're gonna need that cooler air. Second off, you're gonna need some moisture. And as that moisture starts to warm, or that warmer ground and moisture starts to warm that air just above it, it starts to cool off and also saturate. And that's where we get the moisture levels, and that's where we start getting the fog to develop. So it's pretty simple and explanatory, but there's very different aspects to it. Whether it's a mountain, whether it's a lake, whether it's surface, it all takes just a little bit of different of a key ingredient to form. And that's why here in northern Michigan, we get several different aspects of fog. So with fall, just be safe out there in the fall mornings, because we are seeing later sunrises until we fall back. You're seeing fog stick around just a little bit longer as the days are getting, harder to warm because, well, less sunlight.
And welcome back, everyone, to Beyond the Forecast. Now, at the top of the show, we teased Mackinac Island. That's right, Mackinac Island will be opening to the public Friday, May 2nd. And we are going to be there live throughout the entire day. I and photojournalist Josh Monroe are going to be out and about, roaming around Mackinac Island, doing some live hits with Michigan This Morning, doing live weather there at noon, and doing some more stories throughout the day, and then also bringing you amazing content both for all the news programs, but also for Beyond the Forecast. So make sure you stay tuned for that, because it is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have a lot of fun facts from Mackinac Island. We are going to have a weather science show dedicated to Mackinac Island for things like lake breezes, but also things that you catch on the lakes, not just the Great Lakes, but big bodies of water and temperature inversions. What do they create? Well, they create superior mirages, and sometimes it can lead to crazy sights. Whether you're on the Michigan shoreline or the Wisconsin shoreline or Illinois shoreline, you can see things elevated because of temperature inversions over colder water and bending light. Example, sometimes when the layers of warmer air and colder air are just right, you can see Milwaukee from across Lake Michigan. No joke. Now, it's not because the Earth is flat. The Earth is still round, but because of the temperature inversion, you're seeing things at a different angle. So even though, yes, the curvature of the Earth is still there and you wouldn't be able to normally see Milwaukee, what's happening is it's bending the light and reflecting it. And you are actually seeing Milwaukee at times when there is a temperature inversion, when you have that warmer air aloft in between two sections of colder air. And if it's just right, you get Fata Mortaga. I believe that's the name of it. Anyway, it all has to do with mirages. We're going to break that down and show you everything that comes with that over on Mackinac Island, because it's all associated with big lakes and island life. Lake breezes, mirages. You know that story of the Flying Dutchman? Superior mirages. That's where it comes from, because sometimes you can see tankers that look like they're floating. And it's all because of light bending and temperature inversions. There's a little bit of science to everything out there, especially around here with our weather. We tend to see some pretty crazy science to go along with that weather. So we'll have all that and more fun coming up on Mackinac Island this Friday. So hopefully you tune into that throughout the day and show you all the fun that Mackinac Island has, not only for the opening day, but throughout the summer, because they are going to be ready as the about 500 occupants that live on the island every year. They see about 1 million plus people come and go throughout the summer months. Wild to think of, isn't it? So we'll have that. But for meteorologist John Gross, as well as meteorologist Haley Fischetti, I'm Chief Meteorologist Michael Stevens, and we will have much more for you tomorrow on Mackinac Island for Beyond the Forecast. So thank you for being here. We do truly appreciate it. Be good, stay safe, take care. We'll see you tomorrow on the island on Beyond the Forecast.